Hello and welcome to the fourth episode in our series of 5. Today we're going to be covering risk and resilience, the role of cyber insurance in education. I'm Ed Renwick. I'm one of the partner managers here at Acronis. I'm delighted to be joined by our guest speakers, Martin Wilson and Wendy Pattison. Martin, would you like to do just a quick intro?
Yeah, hello everybody. Martin Wilson. I'm a serving police detective inspector based in the northeast of England, and I work in the Northeast Business Resilience Centre, crime prevention initiative based in the northeast in Yorkshire, where we work with businesses like Acronis, universities, Coalition of the Willing to come along and help small businesses. But that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. And Wendy?
Hi everybody, my name is Wendy Pattison. I'm the CFO and Business Director at Framwellgate School, Durham. I'm here because back in September, my school faced a serious cyber security breach, and I've worked since then very closely with Martin and the NEBRC and with Ed, and we're doing some outreach work to try and help people avoid what unfortunately we had to encounter back in September.
So guys, look, we're not run through this slide. This is really for visual purposes, but as we all know, and we've discussed at length through this series so far, the threat landscape for every sector, but particularly the education sector, is growing. It's multiplying. It's never going to go away, and we of course need to start thinking about the risk factor, risk management within your organization, and cyber insurance forms one part of that. Of course, Acronis can align a lot of our technology aligns perfectly to the criteria that are mandated by the underwriting community within the cyber insurance sector. But what we really wanted to do today was really delve into how important that is. And from a risk management profile, how does a school navigate all of this? How does an establishment, the people get around the managing all of the continual risks that we have going on outside and inside, unfortunately, organizations? Wendy, from your perspective, from a risk management, looking at it from the whole risk management, how onerous is this? How big is this? And if you maybe talk us through your own experiences, that would be great.
How big is the risk in relation? How big is the in relation to cyber as one risk, or risk management in general?
In general, and obviously we can hone into this, but from risk management perspective, there's a lot more than just the cyber insurance element. There's a lot of cogs in the wheel.
It's huge, and there's a real shift in the last 3 years, I would say. The guidelines in relation to academies are through the Academy Trust Handbook, although the guidelines, pretty much should be followed by all schools, maintained or academies. And a big part of that is the shift across to using risk management, the risk management plan, if you like, to drive your internal audit processes in school. And that in itself then drives, a lot of the budgeting side of things. How do you insure the uninsurable? And that's what your risk management plan looks at. It should look at what are the key real risks in a school, in your setting, specific to you. There'll be some generic ones that impact on everybody. For example, shortage in school funding, change potentially to government, etc. But there'll be some that are very, very specific and not generic, that are very much based on your landscape. So it is a minefield. It can potentially be a huge document based on the nuances of your organization that you work in. And from that, then it's looking at how do you mitigate those risks? How do you ensure where you can some of those risks? And when you can't, how do you budget to make sure that you insure yourselves those risks? So it is a minefield, but it's an extremely important one that you have to get your head into and get the trust to take responsibility for and support you with.
Brilliant. And I know, Wendy, you've kindly put some slides together to help the audience kind of understand a bit more of this. Would you like just let us know when you need to? Do we need to do the slides now?
We can do. We can go through.
Yeah.
I've got 3 slides just to talk about that, if that's helpful. Okay, so I think the reason I put this in is because who knows that people somewhere sitting in a school or an academy have to look at risk management. It sits very much at trust board and governor board level because they are the employer or co-employer of your staff. They are the legal bodies responsible for the organisation. So risk management exists, and somebody somewhere in the academy or the school will be sitting doing that, talking to trustees about it, and actually what are the implications on our school? What are those risks? And gone are the days where a risk management plan, because I've worked in education an awful long time now and I'm actually quite old. So I remember risk management plans going back 20 to 25 years, and they look very, very different to what they look now. It used to be slips, trips and falls. That was the risk that was measured way back when in our settings. Now it's so different because it has to reflect reality. What are the risks in your organisation? How do you know that they are the risks? And, you know, which ones are generic, like I've mentioned, but which ones really are specific to you? So you need to really look at that plan. You need to revisit the plan. And it's one of those plans that statutorily should be on your agendas for each trust board meeting, each full governing board meeting, as a standing item to be discussed by the stakeholders in the room. Also fed into by senior colleagues, network managers, and other staff in your school. And as I said earlier as well, and I alluded to, the education landscape is so vast and varied in sizes of schools and sizes of organisations. The plan has to reflect that, but reflect your school. So it must not be generic in any way, shape or form, other than for generic risks that we all share. It needs to really reflect on your organisation. And I can't speak, you know, highly enough about that. Our risk management plan would have had a cyber attack on potential before we had the attack. It did. As soon as the attack happened, I updated the plan. Trustees considered it. The risk went higher and the mitigations then kicked in. So it's a live document. It has to be a live document. Otherwise, what's the point having it? Gone are the days where the plan was just slips, trips and falls. So you will now on your plan have cybercrime. And you'll have subsections on there as well. So you need to think about the impact of that overarching, what happens if we have a cyber attack? Well, what does happen? You know, you've got the potential for a data breach. That in itself is a huge risk with huge potential implications. You've got a risk whereby, you know, if you have to close school, how do you know your kids are safe? How do you know your vulnerable kids are safe? How do you know your staff are safe? Can you guarantee that everyone can keep in touch with each other? So that's where your business discontinuity plan comes into play. And what is that risk of business discontinuity as well? Because if you haven't got that, you've got reputational damage. So there's all the fallout from, you know, one incident, but underneath it all. And Martin talks about layers of an onion. I would use the same analogy for this. There's lots and lots of layers to an individual risk, probably more so with a cyber attack than any other one that's on our plan, but it's understanding them and how you mitigate against them. So your plan has to reflect all of that. But then the key bit is that internal audit programs are meant to be driven from this. And in the Academy Trust Handbook for academies, it clearly states that that is exactly the case. So your risk plan is taken by your internal auditor, and most likely at year end by your external auditor. They'll look at it, they'll look and see how fit for purpose they think it is, but they'll test it. They will test it, they will challenge it. And a recommendation from me would be to use your internal auditor or somebody else who can do assessments, maybe more specialist assessments on your network, on cybersecurity, on your business continuity plan. And you know, use your risk register and have that independent assessment of your plans, of you know, what you think you can do to mitigate this risk. And that's a really good starting point for you, because it's not just you looking at it, it's using external expertise to help you look at it and help you think, this plan isn't fit for purpose, or yes it is, or maybe you could do with a tweak. And it's there to give your trustees and your board of governors assurance that, you know, you really know what you're doing here. You're really thinking about your organisation and the nuances of it and how you are mitigating risk in that context. And you're having it checked independently. And really as well, and I say this a lot when we talk to colleagues, the cost of proactivity is significantly cheaper than reactivity. Because if you have to react to something, your budget goes out the water. You just have to find the money. You just have to. You haven't got a choice. So the money is there. Whether we like it or not, it is there because you have to find it. So find it earlier and it will be an awful lot cheaper and hopefully the impact an awful lot less.
In terms of, you mentioned around that revisiting the plan on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked to organizations on the, from a technical side, and they, for example, patching, they may have what they think is a regular patch and update plan, and that plan might be every 6 months, but as we know, that's not regular enough. From a stakeholder, everyone getting around the table, what would you recommend from your own experiences? What should regular look like? Should it be bi-week, you know, fortnightly, monthly, quarterly? What would you recommend?
I think depending on who's responsible in your academy, so usually in a school, apologies if I use school or academy, it's the same thing. We're all education, we all do the same job. I think in those bigger schools, bigger trusts, you would have most likely my role would be responsible for doing risk management planning, and it's something you've got your hands in all the time. It's you know, it's as regular as it needs to be. You're updating it, you're looking at the landscape, you're thinking, I need to put this on the next agenda, I need to talk about this, measure this. Again, in your smaller schools, it most likely will be the head teacher. So they will not have that, the team in place to be able to have that resource to do it as regularly. But the non-negotiable is that it should be on every audit committee meeting, if you have an audit committee or finance committee, who usually will meet somewhere between 3 to 5 times a year. They usually will have the delegated responsibility from the trust, from the governors, to be responsible for risk management, because it does have a huge link back to finances. So yes, that would be 3 to 5 times a year. They should have their eye on it. Trust board should be also having a discussion, probably at a more superficial level, knowing that the audit committee have done the majority of the work, but where the trust board then come into play is where big decisions need to be made, where they need to release reserves, for example, or maybe change an insurance person, organisation, whatever that might be. So it's definitely within the Academy Trust Handbook. It's definitely within the Financial Management Standard for schools. It's there, and we can't take our eye off the importance of this. But I keep going back to, it's no good just me doing this on my own, sitting on my own, not telling anybody about it. The trust and the governors have to be responsible for it. It is their plan. In an ideal world, they would write it because they are the owners of the company. Governors are the co-employers of maintained schools. So they are the responsible bodies. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant, Wendy.
Happy for me to move on to the next slide, or Martin, do you want to ask anything?
I guess the only thing I would sort of add around risk management is with cyber attacks. I mean, you've got to go from nothing to somewhere. So if cyber attacks are actually on the agenda, that's great. But I guess to be a bit better, you've got to be nuanced about it. What do I mean by that? Well, there are different kinds of cyber attacks that can have all sorts of different impacts. So it's thinking ahead about those. So it's thinking like the impact of a phishing attack may be very different to the impact from a disputed denial of service attack and what that means. Probably more time to get into all of that than what we've got now, but just start to have a little think, if you haven't done so already, of what are the most common cyber attacks that we're likely to face and what might their impacts be, what might our response be to those different attacks.
And I suppose I would add there's, from a cyber insurance perspective, there's a lot of criteria in there to score how good the policy looks from an insurability perspective. And there's a lot of controls in there that you can't do anything about: location, the industry you're in, but they will have bearings on the on the score, the ultimate score for you. And obviously, the more the education sector get hit, the more of a risk factor that becomes for these organizations. But the bit that I've seen that you are in control of are the technical controls, which we've discussed in other elements: vulnerability assessments, malware, firewalls, fire breaks, air gaps. These are the bits that you have got some control over to some degree. Again, limited by budget always. But they're the factors that I would recommend that people focus on from a cyber insurance kind of score and criteria perspective. Wendy, do you need us to move on to the next slide?
Yes, please. So I kind of wanted to put this in because of our experience of our insurance during the cyber event. Being an academy, most academies will be with what's called the risk protection arrangement, which is the Department for Education's insurance policy, if you like, for academies. And part of that does include cover for a cyber event. We had a bit of a challenge with RPA and our claim. Very in a nutshell, and we did cover this, I think, in previous webinars, but in a nutshell, the loss adjuster, CyberClan, were unable to come out in time for us because we had to take our network down, and we needed somebody out the following morning to help us to do an intrusive survey on the network to see where the problems were. CyberClan couldn't give us a quote immediately, and they couldn't commit to coming out the following day. For business discontinuity purposes and reputational damage purposes, we had to measure that risk, and we made the decision to use a different company. And because of that and a couple of other things, then RPA didn't actually cover us, and we were unable to claim. Well, we claimed on the insurance, but they wouldn't give us any payout. And one of the things that they came back to us with, and I've put it on the slide here, there's a few things here that I think some people may or may not know. They want us to have at least 3 backup copies of important data on at least 2 separate devices. 1 must be off-site. All employees or trustees or governors who have access to the network should have done training. And the training, I've put the training on the link there, but it's cybersecurity training. They have to watch a video, it's about half an hour, and then they download a certificate, and that's evidence that the right people in your organisation, including trustees and governors, which I'll always go back to, they have done the training, and they are, they know what it means to be cyber safe in your environment. We should be registered with Police Cyber Alarm, which Martin's alluded to previously, and the school has a cyber response plan in place. Some other information there, which again, we talked about NCSC resources. These are really useful guides, which we now have accessed. We've actually sent these to parents after we had our data breach, but there's some really, really good information on there to help schools understand the threat, but also the things they can do to protect themselves. And again, these are really useful, certainly for those smaller establishments who don't necessarily have the expertise in place there. Regular training is really vital, and I don't just mean the training for trustees and governors, but generally for staff. It would be very, very useful to add on to the annual cycle of training something in relation to how to keep yourself and your organisation safe. So every year in schools, it's statutory, we have to have annual safeguarding refresher training, which links back to keeping children safe in education. But within the same document, it talks a lot about doing a 360-degree questionnaire around the cybersecurity and security of your school. So I think it all comes back to the safeguarding of children. So I think it's important that schools bring in training, CPD, for their staff on an annual basis that really does look at cybersecurity. What can happen if you click on a link in an email? What can happen if we have to close school because there's been a huge data breach and are the kids safe? It's helping them understand the implications of an attack on a school and therefore helping them understand why they need to do everything that we're telling them to do, because sometimes they don't, and it's a hard sell sometimes in a school when teachers are here to teach at the end of the day, but we have hard messages to give and that they, they really need to comply with. And really as well, big one for me is look at your budget. People on the call today, people in the audience may have no budgetary responsibilities. They may well not do. However, it's making sure that there is a link within your organisation right the way up to the trust board and governing board, whereby budgets are being considered really carefully against your risk management plan, against your school priorities, and against the nuances of your school again, making sure that you are funding the proactivity and also potentially, if you can, looking at a contingency just in case things go wrong. Lessons learned, I've now got that in place. And at the end of the day, not every school have reserves. Some do, and that is your contingency. So that's great. But many, many schools are not in that position.
Martin, anything to add on that?
Sort of indirectly from the previous slide, just when we're talking about cyber insurance, I think one of the things that I've learned over recent times is to obviously understand that the devil's in the detail. So what does good look like? Well, you're looking for three things in an insurance policy. So you've got your first party coverage, so that, uncovers any costs as a direct damage caused as a result of the incident. Third party coverage, which covers you in the event you're being sued. But critically here is the third element of that is the incident response, and Wendy's alluded to there some of the pros and cons. So understanding what that incident response look like, what is the SLA, what's the turnaround, does it include legal counsel, public relations support, things like that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, next slide if that's okay.
Thank you, Wendy.
So just a few, my brain dump here, thinking ahead. In your school, do you understand what's attached to your network? So if you did have to pull the plug one day, what is attached there? Is your telephone system attached, photocopiers, tills, management information system? If worst comes to the worst and you have to pull the plug out, what you're going to lose, what have you got to do? If you don't know about that now, you're going to have to be very, very quick thinking on your feet if the worst does happen. So really give some attention to that and get that in your plans now. What are your mitigations if that network does have to go down? So who do you need to talk to? How can you keep those kids safe? And this all comes back to the safeguarding of children, safeguarding of your school community. Something that you have to do really, and it's because they are the responsible people. And from when we had our attack back in September, some of the first people I spoke to were trustees and governors. Talk to them, limited necessarily. So because obviously live police investigation, reputational damage, you don't want it to get too far out there and out of control. You want to have a really controlled message. But talk to your chair, talk to your vice chair, talk to maybe an expert you've got on your panel if you have got one, which would be great if you did. But just be honest with them. You need their support and you need them at some point to make some critical decisions. So don't hide this from them. Don't be ashamed about what's happened. We're all in it together. So just, tell them, tell the right people. Update your risk register, which we've talked about. And then some technical stuff, which I don't know if Martin, you want to talk about things like network group policies and that kind of thing, but there are some technical things to really think about, don't have the right password policies in place, etc., which we didn't, and we learned from that and we put that in place. But there's some more technical things, Martin. I don't know if you want to jump in at that point.
I think the big sort of the link here with the technical controls and insurance is twofold. So I don't know if you say you're doing things like cyber essentials and you're not. What does that look like from an insurance coverage? And I think the second thing is, and it just touches on some of what Ed was talking about, is a lot of this is demonstrable. It's demonstrable to insurers. And if you can demonstrate that you're doing some of this good stuff, then that might, reflect your premiums. And I know that the insurance marketplace is going through a bit of a paradigm shift really in how it assesses cyber risk. So you may find that actually to get that better insurance premium, you're asked to not only do some of this, but evidence it as well. So that's where it can be really good to say things like, I use the Acronis Cyber Cloud Protect solution. I've done the vulnerability assessment. Here's my cyber essentials framework. Whatever it may be, you can demonstrate that it is that you're doing what it is that you say you do and benefit from an insurance perspective.
And I think the beauty and the thing, not to get too overawed about, I suppose, is the criteria that the DFE have, the criteria that the NCSC have, and the criteria that the cyber insurance companies, the overlap. There's some real common themes between the three of them. So this isn't about having three different kind of policies and they're all got different criteria. There's a lot of overlapping criteria between these three entities or these three areas that we're describing. So when you kind of solve one problem with one, you'll be solving it with the other guys as well, and that'll have a knock-on effect. Obviously, Martin mentioned quite well. There's a lot of technical controls that are available to you guys free. With that, are not going to have an effect on your budget. Some of these come via Acronis and our partners. Some of these come by the NCSC, the DFE, and NEBRC. And there is a lot out there to kind of help you guys to. I think the overriding message that I keep hearing on all of these is be proactive, get ahead of these events occurring. And there's lots of people there to kind of help you do that, to help you navigate risk, cyber insurance, and the threat landscape, all of those things. There's lots of willing people that are going to be there to give you the right advice. I'm just again conscious of time. These calls go so quickly. Wendy, if you are able to leave the guys with just one single thing to go away with, what would that be?
Plan for the worst and hope for the best. It will happen one day to either your organisation or somebody that you've heard of. It will. And don't think it won't happen, because if you do, then it is that blissful ignorance. We all think we're okay. We're not. Plan for it. Get it in your risk register. Set a budget for it. Just understand threat landscape and what it actually would mean to you in your school and how you can best protect yourself. And if the worst happens, how you can best deal with it.
Thank you. Martin, any closing remarks from your good self?
Yeah, so SLA from insurance perspective, absolutely key, understanding that, but really understanding its instant response feature, really understanding how all that works, because trust me, something like this happens, you're going to be panicking. So not only how it works, who do you contact, how do you activate it? If all the systems are down, is there a hard copy spreadsheet somewhere where you've got the numbers that you can ring? That would be some things that I would consider.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much, guys. And thanks to everybody for attending. Hoping that you can join us for the final session, which is around budgeting for security, which should be the most exciting of all of the podcasts that we've done. And with that, thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you again soon.